My husband left me drowning in $200,000 of debt he secretly accumulated in my name. He told me I was financially incompetent while hiding his business failures. 1 year later, I stood in an auction room and bought the company he destroyed, watching his face as the gavel fell. This is how I turned his betrayal into my greatest victory. It was a crisp September morning when I entered the county courthouse, clutching my bidding paddle with trembling hands. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The auction for Meridian Solutions was about to begin, and the Athos irony wasn't lost on me. Less than 12 months ago, I had sat in this same building, tears streaming down my face as I filed for bankruptcy protection, a last resort after discovering the mountain of debt my soon-to-be ex-husband Frank had hidden from me throughout our marriage. Now I was back, not as a victim, but as a bidder. My heart pounded against my ribs as I scanned the room, freezing when I spotted him in the back corner. Frank Bishop, the man who had spent 8 years convincing me I wasn't smart enough to handle money, while secretly taking out loans in my name to prop up his failing business ventures. He hadn't seen me yet, and I was grateful for the momentary invisibility. The auctioneer's voice cut through my thoughts. Next up, lot number 47, Meridian Solutions, a digital marketing agency. Assets include client contracts, proprietary software, office equipment, and intellectual property. Starting bid is $150,000. I felt a strange calm wash over me as I raised my paddle. This moment represented more than a business acquisition. It was the final chapter in a story of betrayal, resilience, and rebirth. Frank had taken everything from me, my savings, my credit, score my self-worth, but in the process of rebuilding my life from the ashes he left behind, I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. As other bidders joined in, I caught Frank's eye across the room. His face drained of color as recognition dawned. The shock in his expression was exactly what I had imagined during those endless nights when I'd lain awake, wondering how I would survive the financial catastrophe he'd orchestrated. His lips parted, forming words I couldn't hear over the auctioneer's rapid-fire cadence, but I could read the disbelief in his features. $200,000, I called out, my voice steadier than I expected. The room fell momentarily, silent. This was substantially more than the appraised value. But I knew something the other bidders didn't. Meridian's potential had never been the problem. Frank's mismanagement had been its downfall. The gavel fell with a decisive crack. Sold to bidder number 29 for $200,000. In that moment, staring across the room at the man who had once told me I would never succeed without him, I felt no vindication, no triumph, only a profound sense of coming full circle. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. My future. As I signed the final paperwork, memories flooded back. I remembered the day we met. Frank, charismatic and confident, explaining his vision for a digital marketing agency that would revolutionize how small businesses connected with customers. I had been captivated, not just by his charm but by his apparent business acumen. He spoke the language of entrepreneurship fluently, painting pictures of success that seemed within easy reach. I had been working as a project manager at a tech company then, saving diligently for my own future. When we married 2 years later, combining our finances had seemed natural. Frank insisted on managing our money. I deal with business finances every day, he'd said. You focus on what you're good at. What had started as a reasonable division of labor slowly morphed into something more sinister. Questions about our accounts were met with deflection or patronizing explanations. When I expressed interest in learning more about investing, Frank laughed it off. Honey, some people have a head for numbers and some don't. You're brilliant at other things. The gaslighting was so subtle that I didn't recognize it for what it was, Every financial decision became too complicated to explain. Every time I raised concerns about our spending, I was told I didn't understand the big picture. And all the while, he was systematically destroying our financial future, taking out loans, maxing out credit cards, even forging my signature on financial documents. The day I discovered the truth remained seared in my memory. Frank had left his laptop open, and a notification had popped up, a final warning from a creditor I'd never heard of. What followed was a nightmarish scavenger hunt through our financial history, each discovery more devastating than the last. Credit card statements for accounts I didn't know existed, loan documents with my forged signature, tax returns that didn't match what I'd signed. By the time I confronted him, the damage was catastrophic. $200,000 in debt, most of it in my name alone. "You never wanted to be involved in the finances," he'd said defensively. "I was handling it. Every business has cash flow issues sometimes." When I told him I wanted a divorce, his mask slipped completely. "Good luck surviving without me," he'd sneered. "You can barely balance a checkbook. You'll be coming back, begging for help." He'd been so confident in my failure that he hadn't bothered to hide his tracks well. That sloppiness became my first advantage in the months that followed. As I walked out of the courthouse, now the official owner of Meridian Solutions, I spotted Frank waiting by my car. For a moment, I considered avoiding the confrontation, but I was done running from difficult conversations. "Rachel." He spoke my name like a question, disbelief still etched across his features. Where did you get the money to do this?" I met his gaze steadily. "You always said I didn't understand business, Frank. Turns out I just needed the right motivation. This is ridiculous. You can't seriously think you can run Meridian. You don't know the first thing about—" "I know it was generating consistent profit until you started siphoning money from the company accounts," I interrupted. "I know you lost the Westbrook contract because you failed to deliver on time 3 consecutive quarters, and I know exactly how to fix the problems you created." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Rachel, be reasonable. This is my company. My vision. My life's work." "It was your company," I corrected him. "Now it's mine. And unlike you, I plan to make it successful again." As I drove away, leaving Frank standing in the parking lot, I felt the weight of the past year, the tears, the sleepless nights, the paralyzing fear, begin to lift. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Meridian was a shell of what it once had been, its reputation tarnished by Frank's mismanagement. But I had survived worse, much worse. This was just the beginning of my story. A story about a woman who discovered her power in the wake of betrayal. A woman who rebuilt herself from scratch when everything was taken from her. A woman who turned catastrophe into opportunity, and it all started with that moment in the auction room when I reclaimed not just a business, but my belief in myself. As I stood outside Meridian Solutions headquarters, now my headquarters, I took a moment to absorb the reality of what I'd accomplished. The modern glass building reflected the afternoon sun, casting a golden glow that felt symbolic somehow. Just 1 year ago, I couldn't have imagined standing here as the owner. Yet here I was, holding the keys to both the building and my future. My phone buzzed with a text from Penelope, my best friend and now Meridian's new finance director. The FI team is waiting in the conference room. "Ready when you are, boss." Boss. The word still felt foreign, like a coat that didn't quite fit. Yet with each passing day, I was growing into this new role, this new version of myself that had emerged from the ruins Frank had left behind. I squared my shoulders and walked through the front doors, nodding to Julia at reception. The employees still looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. I couldn't blame them. In the span of a month, their company had collapsed, been auctioned off, and acquired by the ex-wife of their former CEO. Their uncertainty was palpable, hanging in the air like a fog that hadn't quite lifted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The conference room fell silent as I entered. 15 faces turned toward me, some familiar from my earlier visits during the due diligence process, others new to me. These people had survived Frank's mismanagement, staying aboard a sinking ship out of loyalty or necessity. Now their futures were in my hands. "Good morning, everyone," I began, setting my portfolio on the table. "First, I want to thank you for staying with Meridian through this transition. I know change brings uncertainty, and you've all experienced more than your fair share recently." I paused, making eye contact with each person around the table. "You're probably wondering why the ex-wife of your former CEO would buy this company. Some of you might even question my qualifications or intentions." A few uncomfortable glances were exchanged. At least they knew I wasn't going to dance around the elephant in the room. So, let me be transparent. Frank left me with $200,000 in debt and a destroyed credit score. He told me repeatedly that I didn't understand business, that I wasn't financially competent enough to make important decisions. My voice remained steady, professional. This wasn't about airing dirty laundry. It was about establishing trust. What he didn't know was that before we met, I'd managed million-dollar projects for Lennox Technologies. I'd overseen budgets, timelines, and teams larger than Meridian's. I stepped back from that career during our marriage, but those skills never disappeared. They were just dormant. I opened my portfolio and distributed the document that had taken me weeks to perfect: Meridian's revival strategy. This company has good bones. The core services are solid, the technology is sound, and most importantly, you, the team, are talented. What Meridian lacked wasn't potential. It was proper leadership and financial management. As they flipped through my detailed plan, I watched their expressions shift from skepticism to curiosity, and in some cases, cautious optimism. I'd spent countless hours researching the digital marketing industry, analyzing Meridian's past performance, and identifying the exact points where Frank's decisions had sent the company into a downward spiral. "We're going to rebuild this company. Together," I continued, "not as the agency Frank envisioned, but as something better, more sustainable, more innovative, and more people-focused. I believe Meridian can become the premier boutique agency in this region within 18 months. Bobby, the lead developer who'd been with the company since its early days, spoke up first. "These projections are ambitious," he said, pointing to the growth chart. "What makes you think we can achieve this when we've been losing clients for the past year?" It was a fair question, asked without hostility, but with genuine concern. I appreciated his directness. "3 reasons," I replied. "First, I've already secured meetings with 4 former clients who left during the final months of Frank's leadership. They liked your work, but lost faith in the company's stability. Second, our overhead costs will decrease by 30% with the changes outlined on page 12, without cutting any jobs," I added quickly, seeing the flash of worry cross several faces. "And third?" Bobby prompted. I smiled. "The third reason is sitting in this room. This team created award-winning campaigns even while the company was imploding around you. Imagine what you can accomplish with proper support and leadership." The tension in the room noticeably eased. These weren't just empty promises or motivational platitudes. I'd done my homework, and they could see it in the detailed analysis before them. As the meeting continued, questions became more specific, more engaged. Pippa from the creative team wanted to discuss the rebranding proposal. Alex from client services had thoughts on rebuilding relationships with lost accounts. By the time we wrapped up 2 hours later, the energy had transformed from cautious skepticism to cautious excitement. "Thank you all," I said as we concluded. "My door is always open. This turnaround won't happen overnight, but I believe in what we're building here." As they filed out, Penelope lingered behind. Once we were alone, her professional demeanor melted into a wide grin. "You absolutely crushed that," she said, giving me a quick hug. "Did you see their faces when you walked them through the financial restructuring?" I thought Roy was going to fall out of his chair. I laughed, feeling the tension drain from my shoulders. I was terrified they'd see right through me. "Through what? You know exactly what you're doing." Penelope had been my rock throughout this journey, from the day I'd discovered Frank's deception to the moment I'd decided to bid on Meridian. When everyone else thought I was crazy, she'd been the one person who believed in my vision. "Some days, I do," I admitted. "Other days I'm making it up as I go along. That's called leadership," she replied with a wink. "Now, are you ready for the next part? Because Donna from the bank called while you were in the meeting. The loan committee approved the operating capital." I felt a surge of triumph so powerful. It nearly took my breath away. The bank loan had been the final piece of the puzzle, the one hurdle I wasn't sure I could overcome with my credit still in recovery. "We're really doing this," I whispered, half to myself. "We really are," Penelope confirmed, "and Frank has no idea what's coming." As we walked through what was now my company, I realized something profound. Buying Meridian wasn't the end of my journey. It was just the beginning. The real victory wouldn't be in proving Frank wrong, it would be in proving myself right. 5 years earlier, my life had looked completely different. I still remember the day Frank and I moved into our Tudor-style home in Oak Ridge Heights, a picturesque suburb with tree-lined streets and meticulously maintained lawns. The real estate agent had called it our forever home, and I had believed her, envisioning holiday gatherings, children playing in the spacious backyard, and growing old together on the wraparound porch. "What do you think, Rach?" Frank had asked, wrapping his arm around my waist as we stood in the empty living room. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows, casting patterns on the hardwood floors. "Can you see us building a life here?" "It's perfect," I'd replied, leaning into him. And in that moment, it truly was. I had met Frank at a charity gala 3 years earlier. I was there representing Lennox Technologies, where I'd worked my way up from project coordinator to senior project manager over 6 years. Frank was the keynote speaker, charismatic, passionate, and full of innovative ideas about how digital marketing could transform small businesses. "The problem," he'd told the audience, "is that boutique companies are trying to compete using outdated marketing strategies. They can't match the advertising budgets of the big corporations, so they need smarter, more targeted approaches." His company, Meridian Solutions, specialized in exactly that, helping small businesses punch above their weight class in the digital marketplace. I'd been impressed by his vision and approached him after the speech to discuss potential collaborations. With Lennox, what began as a professional conversation over drinks evolved into dinner, and then into the most engaging date I'd ever experienced. Frank listened intently when I spoke about my work, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in my perspectives. He was ambitious without being arrogant, confident without being cocky. Our courtship had been a whirlwind. Weekend trips to nearby coastal towns, surprise picnics in the park, late-night conversations about our dreams and aspirations. Frank talked about expanding Meridian nationwide, perhaps even internationally. I shared my goals of eventually becoming a director at Lennox, overseeing larger projects and teams. "You're brilliant at what you do," he told me one evening as we walked along the riverfront. "The way you break down complex problems, it's impressive. You've got the kind of mind that can transform an industry." His belief in me had been intoxicating. In my previous relationships, my career ambition had often been a point of contention. But Frank celebrated it, encouraged it, made me feel like my professional identity was something to nurture rather than suppress. When he proposed 6 months after we met, I didn't hesitate. The diamond ring, like everything else about Frank, was elegant and perfectly suited to my taste. We married in a small ceremony at a historic mansion, surrounded by close friends and family who toasted to our bright future together. The first year of marriage had been blissful. We rented a modest apartment while saving for a house, both working long hours but making time for each other. Frank's business was growing steadily, not the meteoric rise he'd initially projected, but solid progress that seemed sustainable. I continued excelling at Lennox, earning a substantial bonus after successfully managing the rollout of a new software platform for a major client. It was when we decided to buy a house that the first subtle shift occurred. Frank suggested pooling our finances to qualify for a better mortgage. "It makes sense," he'd explained, spreadsheets open on his laptop. "With our combined assets and my business experience, we'll be able to maximize our investment potential." It had seemed logical. Frank dealt with financial projections and business planning every day. His expertise in this area far outweighed mine, despite my project management experience. The joint accounts were established, and with that simple action, the foundation was laid for what would come later. "You know," Frank said casually one evening, about 2 months after we'd moved into the Tudor house, "you work so hard at Lennox, but they don't really appreciate what you bring to the table. Have you ever thought about other options?" I remember pausing, pasta sauce spoon in midair. "What do you mean? I just got promoted last quarter." He shrugged, taking a sip of his wine. "A promotion with what? A 6% raise? After that Harris project that brought them millions? You're worth more, Rachel." The seed was planted, and Frank continued to water it in the months that followed. Small comments about my long hours, the stress I brought home, the lack of recognition from my superiors. Simultaneously, he began talking more about Meridian's growth and his need for someone with my organizational skills. "Imagine what we could build together," he'd say, eyes alight with enthusiasm. "A power couple running a company that's truly changing the game for small businesses. No more answering to bosses who don't value you." The idea was seductive. Working alongside my husband, building something meaningful together, having more control over my schedule and contributions. When Frank officially asked me to join Meridian as operations director, I handed in my resignation at Lennox the following week. My colleagues were shocked. "You're giving up a director track position to work at your husband's startup?" My mentor Donna had asked incredulously. "Rachel, you've spent years building your reputation here. It's not just his company. It'll be ours," I'd explained, believing it with every fiber of my being. "We're going to expand it together, with my operational expertise and his vision." Donna hadn't looked convinced. "Just make sure you maintain your professional identity," she'd warned. "I've seen too many women subsume their careers into their partners' ventures, only to lose both if things go south." I'd laughed off her concern. Frank and I were different. We were equals, partners in both life and business. The transition to Meridian had been exciting at first. I implemented new project management systems, streamlined workflows, and helped reorganize the small but growing team. Frank introduced me to clients with pride, highlighting my background and expertise. For a brief shining moment, it felt like the beginning of everything we'd dreamed about. But within 6 months, the dynamic began to change. Frank started questioning my decisions in front of employees. Client strategy meetings that had once included me were suddenly scheduled when I was occupied with other tasks. The financial reports I'd asked to review were perpetually being updated or not finalized yet. "I just want to understand our cash flow better," I'd said one night after discovering a significant client payment hadn't arrived when expected. Frank had sighed, closing his laptop. "Rachel, you need to trust me on the financial side. That's my wheelhouse. You focus on operations. That's where you shine." It sounded reasonable, even considerate. He was playing to our strengths, dividing responsibilities logically. At least that's what I told myself as the wall between me and the company's finances grew higher and more impenetrable. Looking back on that time from my newly empowered position, I could see how skillfully Frank had orchestrated my isolation from Meridian's true financial situation. How cleverly he'd separated me from my independent career while simultaneously pushing me to the periphery of our company. But in those early days, standing in our beautiful Tudor home with its mortgage, in both our names, I had been blind to the red flags. I had trusted completely, loved wholly, and believed in the future we were building, never suspecting that the foundation was already cracking beneath our feet. The first crack in the perfect image appeared about 18 months after I joined Meridian. I was working late, finalizing a project implementation plan for a new client, a local furniture chain looking to expand their online presence. The office had emptied hours ago, but I wanted to complete the framework before meeting with the creative team in the morning. As I reached for a file on Frank's desk, I accidentally knocked over a stack of papers. While gathering them, a past due notice from one of our vendors caught my eye. The amount wasn't astronomical, around $12,000 for web hosting services, but the letter indicated it was the third notice sent. I frowned, certain I hadn't seen the previous warnings. As the operations director, all vendor communications should have crossed my desk. When I mentioned it to Frank over breakfast the next morning, his reaction was dismissively casual. "Oh, that? It's just a billing dispute," he said, not looking up from his phone. "They've been overcharging us for months. I'm handling it. Shouldn't I be involved in vendor disputes? That falls under operations." Frank glanced up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features before his expression softened. "It's more of a financial negotiation at this point. Don't worry about it, Rach. I've got it under control." I let it go. After all, Frank had built Meridian from nothing. He knew the business inside and out. If he said he was handling it, why wouldn't I believe him? But similar incidents began accumulating like dust in overlooked corners. A conversation. With our lead developer revealed he hadn't received the software licenses I'd thought Frank had purchased months ago. A chance meeting with a former client at a coffee shop led to an awkward exchange when she mentioned Frank had promised a refund that never materialized. Small things, easily explained away, yet together they formed a pattern I was increasingly unable to ignore. Then came the credit card statement. I rarely checked our personal accounts anymore. Frank had taken over managing our finances completely, insisting he was streamlining our money management to save me time. But when a large purchase didn't appear on our monthly budget report, I logged in to investigate. What I found left me cold. Our credit card was nearly maxed out at $30,000 with charges I didn't recognize, expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never visited, hotel stays in cities Frank hadn't mentioned traveling to, and multiple cash advances. That night, I waited until Frank came home, the statement printed and sitting on the kitchen island between us. "What's this about?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Frank's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. For a split second, something like panic crossed his face before his features rearranged into a practiced expression of mild exasperation. "Business expenses," he said simply, loosening his tie. "I've been courting some major potential clients. You know how it works. They expect to be wined and dined. On our personal credit card? And why wouldn't you tell me about these meetings? I was going to move the charges to the business account at the end of the quarter for tax purposes." He sighed, rubbing his face tiredly. "And I didn't tell you because you've been so stressed lately. I didn't want to add to your plate." The explanation wasn't entirely implausible. Business development had always been Frank's domain, and I had been working overtime on several challenging projects. Still, something felt off. "What about these cash advances?" I pressed. "Emergency situation with a server crash for the Westbrook account. Had to pay a specialist in cash after hours." He walked around the island and kissed my forehead. "I should have mentioned it. You're right. I've just been trying to shield you from some of the day-to-day fires." I wanted to believe him. It was easier than the alternative, that my husband was hiding significant financial decisions from me, possibly even lying. So I nodded and let him change the subject to dinner plans, the unease settling into a quiet corner of my mind. The incident faded into the background as Meridian faced a more public challenge. A major client, dissatisfied with their campaign results, threatened to pull their business. As operations director, I should have been deeply involved in the resolution strategy, but Frank insisted on handling it personally. It's become a relationship issue more than an operational one, he explained. Trust me on this. A week later, he announced triumphantly that not only had he saved the account, but he'd convinced them to increase their monthly retainer. The office celebrated with champagne, everyone toasting Frank's negotiation skills. I smiled and raised my glass, ignoring the fact that I still hadn't seen the revised contract or been briefed on the new deliverables my team would be responsible for. That night, I tried once more to discuss my concerns. Frank, I feel like I'm being pushed out of key decisions at Meridian. We're supposed to be partners in this business. He looked genuinely surprised. What are you talking about? You run operations and you do it brilliantly. But I'm not included in financial discussions, client negotiations, or growth strategy anymore. When we started, you said we'd build the company together. Frank set down his wine glass and took my hands. Rachel, you're overthinking this. We each have our strengths. You're exceptional at managing projects and teams, but the financial and business development side, that's where I excel. It's about division of labor, not exclusion. His words made logical sense, yet the knot in my stomach tightened. Frank's expression was earnest, his tone reasonable, but something in his eyes didn't match, a guardedness that hadn't been there in our early days. The most troubling incident came 3 months later, when I overheard Frank on the phone in his home. Office door slightly ajar. His voice was low, urgent in a way I rarely heard. Listen, I need another extension. Yes, I know what I promised, but the funds aren't liquid yet. No, she doesn't know, and she's not going to. Just give me until the end of the month. When I asked him about it later, he dismissed it as a tense negotiation with a potential investor. These deals get complicated, he said. Nothing for you to worry about. But I was worrying, more with each passing day. The Frank I knew, or thought I knew, had always been transparent, had valued my input, had treated me as an equal. This new Frank kept secrets, dismissed my concerns, and increasingly made me feel like an employee rather than a partner. I began paying closer attention to the subtle shifts in our relationship, both at home and at work. The way Frank would change. The subject when I asked about certain clients. The growing frequency with which he'd step out to take calls in private. The small inconsistencies in his explanations for late nights at the office. These weren't dramatic red flags waving in a storm. They were soft warning bells chiming just at the edge of hearing. Easy to dismiss individually, increasingly impossible to ignore collectively. Still, I wasn't prepared for what was coming. No collection of small warning signs could have adequately prepared me for the truth that was about to shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my husband, and my future. As months passed, the distance between Frank and me expanded like a slow-growing chasm. What had once been a partnership of equals gradually transformed into something I barely recognized. The shift wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment when everything changed, but rather a slow erosion of trust, transparency, and respect. At Meridian, my role became increasingly ceremonial. I still held the title of operations director, but my actual influence had diminished to the point where team members began bypassing me, going directly to Frank with questions and concerns that should have fallen under my purview. I just assumed, Frank had already discussed it with you, became a common refrain when I'd discover decisions made without my input. One particularly revealing incident occurred during a quarterly planning meeting. I'd prepared a detailed presentation on operational efficiencies, complete with data-driven recommendations for improving our project delivery systems. Frank had seemed enthusiastic when I'd mentioned it the night before. Sounds great, Rach. The team could definitely use some structure, he'd said. But when the meeting began, Frank immediately took control, launching into his own agenda that completely omitted my presentation. We need to focus on sales and new business development this quarter, he announced, displaying a strategy deck I'd never seen. Operations improvements can wait until we've secured more revenue. I sat there, slides unopened on my laptop, as Frank effectively dismissed weeks of my work with a single sentence. The team glanced uncomfortably in my direction, then quickly refocused on Frank's animated pitch for a new direction, one that contradicted much of what we'd been building towards. Later, when I confronted him in his office, Frank seemed genuinely perplexed by my frustration. It wasn't personal, Rachel. It's just business. We need to be agile, ready to pivot when circumstances change. And when exactly did circumstances change? Because yesterday you were on board with my presentation. He sighed, that now familiar expression of patient condescension settling over his features. The marketplace is constantly evolving. As CEO, I need to make executive decisions quickly sometimes. Without consulting your operations director? Without even a heads up that the meeting agenda had completely changed? You're taking this too personally, he replied, his tone softening in a way that somehow made me feel even more dismissed. This is why it's tricky, working with spouses. You need to separate your professional role from your emotions. I left. His office feeling simultaneously angry and uncertain. Was I overreacting? Was I allowing personal feelings to cloud my professional judgment? Frank had always been the visionary, the big picture thinker. Maybe I was too focused on systems and processes when the company needed bold moves. This pattern repeated itself in our home life as well. Decisions that had once been made jointly were now presented to me as fait accompli. I've decided to refinance the house, Frank announced one evening over dinner. Interest rates are favorable, and we can pull some equity out for investments. What? Investments? I asked, setting down my fork. And shouldn't we discuss something like that together? I've been researching some opportunities, he said vaguely. Trust me, it's a smart move financially. The paperwork's already in process. They just need your signature tomorrow. When I pressed for details, Frank became increasingly evasive, eventually snapping, if you'd taken any interest in our finances over the past few years, I wouldn't have to explain basic investment strategy now. That night marked another turning point. As I lay awake beside Frank's sleeping form, I realized how thoroughly he had isolated me from our financial life. I couldn't recall the last time I'd reviewed our accounts, knew our exact mortgage balance, or even been aware of all the credit cards in our names. Somehow, step by imperceptible step, I had surrendered financial visibility in my own life. The following day, I attempted to log into our joint banking portal, only to discover the password had been changed. When I called Frank about it, his explanation came too quickly, too smoothly. Oh, there was a security breach alert. I updated all our passwords last week. I meant to tell you. He rattled off the new password, then immediately changed the subject. By the way, the Andersons invited us for dinner Saturday. I said we'd bring wine. That weekend, while Frank was at a business brunch I'd learned about only when he was walking out the door, I sat down at our home desk and began searching for financial documents. What I found, buried in a folder labeled Home Warranty Info, chilled me to the bone. Credit card statements showing balances far higher than I'd realized. Mortgage refinancing documents not for our current home, but for a property I'd never heard of. A bank statement for an account under Frank's name only, showing regular transfers from our joint account. I was still sitting there, surrounded by papers, when Frank returned. He froze in the doorway, eyes darting from my face to the documents. Spread across the desk, the mask slipped then, just for a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath his usual charm. Then he composed himself, shoulders relaxing as he stepped into the room with a resigned sigh. "I was going to tell you when the timing was right," he said, sinking into the chair opposite me. "The market's been unpredictable, and I've had to make some strategic moves to protect our future." "Strategic moves?" I echoed, holding up a statement for a credit card with a $45,000 balance. "Like maxing out cards I didn't even know existed, or buying property without telling me." "That's an investment property," he countered smoothly. "The return potential is significant. I didn't want to burden you with the details until it was generating income." For every document I pointed to, Frank had an explanation, each one plausible in isolation, yet collectively forming a pattern of deception that was impossible to ignore. He spoke with such conviction that I almost doubted my own concerns. Almost. Believed that these were simply the complex financial maneuvers of a savvy entrepreneur. Almost. "Why keep all this from me, Frank? Why the secrecy if these are just smart business moves?" Something flickered behind his eyes, irritation perhaps, or the realization that his explanations weren't having their usual effect. "Because frankly, finance isn't your strong suit," he said finally, an edge creeping into his voice. "You're brilliant at many things, Rachel, but business finance isn't one of them. I've been trying to shield you from the stress of these decisions." The condescension in his tone crystallized something inside me. This wasn't protection, it was control. This wasn't a partnership. It was a power dynamic where Frank held all. The cards, quite literally, in the case of the credit accounts. As I sat across from my husband, surrounded by evidence of his systematic deception, I realized we had evolved into something unrecognizable from the couple who had once shared dreams and ambitions. He had become a stranger wearing my husband's face, and I had become someone I never thought I'd be. A woman deliberately kept in the dark about her own life. What I didn't know then was that this discovery was merely the tip of an iceberg. The full extent of Frank's financial manipulation remained hidden beneath the surface, waiting to completely upend my world. The house felt unusually quiet the morning everything changed. Frank had left early for a crisis meeting with a client, something that had become increasingly common. I sat at our kitchen island, coffee growing cold as I stared at the business card in my hand. Donna Lambert, financial investigator. My former mentor from Lenox had referred me to her after I'd called in tears the previous evening. "If what you suspect is true, you need professional help, Rachel," Donna had said firmly. "This goes beyond Marshall problems. This is potentially financial abuse." Financial abuse. The term had jolted me. Was that what this was? The systematic way Frank had isolated me from our finances, the gradual erosion of my decision-making power, the constant undermining of my financial competence, it had a name. I had only stepped away for a moment when I heard it, the distinctive ping of Frank's email notification coming from his iPad that he'd uncharacteristically left on the counter. In the 3 years we'd been married, Frank had never left his devices unlocked and unattended. His password protection was a running joke between us, or at least it had been, back when such things still felt like loving quirks rather than red flags. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the device. This was the line, the moment where I would either respect the increasingly questionable boundaries of our marriage or acknowledge that something was fundamentally broken. The screen showed an email from M. Wagner Collection Services with the subject line, "Final notice before legal action." My finger tapped the notification before I could second-guess myself. The email loaded, its contents terse and alarming. "Mr. Bishop, this is our final attempt to resolve this matter outside of court. The outstanding debt of $78,450 must be addressed within 48 hours, or we will proceed with legal action as outlined. In previous communications, the loan was taken out in both your name and Rachel Bishop's, making you jointly liable." My vision blurred as I scrolled through the email chain, revealing a history of increasingly urgent demands for payment on a loan I had never known about, much less agreed to. Attached was a loan document bearing what appeared to be my signature, a signature I had never provided. With shaking hands, I began searching through Frank's email, uncovering a nightmare that had been unfolding behind a carefully constructed facade. Dozens of creditor communications, threatening letters from vendors, an eviction notice for a property I'd never heard of, and most disturbing of all, communications with a private detective agency regarding asset concealment strategies. When the front door opened 3 hours later, I was waiting in the living room, surrounded by printed copies of everything I'd found. Frank's laptop, which I'd also searched, sat open on the coffee table beside me. His expression when he saw me told me everything I needed to know. There was no surprise at being discovered, only calculation, the look of a man measuring his options, deciding which version of himself to present. "You went through my private emails," he said, setting down his briefcase. Not a denial, not even a question of what I'd found. Just an attempt to shift blame. "You forged my signature on loan documents," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "You've been lying to me for years." He sighed, loosening his tie as he sat in the armchair across from me. "It's complicated, Rachel. The business had cash flow issues. I needed to secure funding quickly, and involving you would have just caused unnecessary stress." "Unnecessary stress?" I echoed in disbelief. "Frank, there's over $200,000 in debt here that I never knew about, most of it in my name or both our names. That's not protecting me. That's fraud." His expression hardened. "Don't be dramatic. These are standard business maneuvers. Every entrepreneur has to make tough decisions sometimes. Forging your spouse's signature isn't a tough decision. It's a crime." I pushed forward a particularly damning email. "And what about this? You've been consulting with lawyers about how to hide assets from me. Were you planning to leave all along, to saddle me with the debt while you walked away clean?" Something shifted in Frank's demeanor then, the mask of reasonable explanation falling away completely, revealing a coldness I'd glimpsed only in fragments before. "You were never supposed to see any of this," he said, his voice flat. "But since we're being honest, yes, I've been preparing for contingencies. Meridian is in trouble, Rachel. Serious trouble. The company's drowning in debt, and the walls are closing in. And your solution was to commit fraud? To steal my identity and ruin my credit?" "My solution was to survive," he snapped, standing abruptly. "Do you have any idea what it takes to keep a business afloat in this economy? The compromises? The risks? While you've been obsessing over project timelines and employee satisfaction surveys, I've been fighting to keep everything from collapsing." The sheer audacity of his attempt to cast himself as the victim left me momentarily speechless. "Get out," I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is my house too," he countered, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "The house you've refinanced 3 times without my knowledge? The house that's now leveraged as collateral for loans. I never agreed to?" I stood facing him directly. "Get out now, or the next call I make will be to the police to report identity theft and fraud." For a moment, I thought he might argue further, might try another angle to manipulate the situation. Instead, he gave me a look of such contempt that I barely recognized him. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said quietly. "You think you understand what's happening, but you don't have the full picture. Without me, you're going to crash and burn, Rachel. You simply don't have what it takes to handle what's coming." "I'll take my chances," I replied, surprising myself with my resolve. "Now leave." As the door closed behind him, the enormity of what had just happened, of what I had discovered, crashed over me in waves. My marriage was over. My financial life was in ruins. The company I had helped build was apparently teetering on the edge of collapse. And I had no idea how deep the deception truly went. I sank onto the couch, reaching for my phone with trembling fingers. I needed help, professional help, to unravel the mess Frank had created. The business card Donna had given me was still on the kitchen counter. Financial abuse, she had called it. Now I knew she was right, but the term seemed almost too mild for the systematic destruction of my financial identity, for the calculated betrayal by the person I had trusted most. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a fight for my future, a future suddenly hanging by the thinnest of threads. The weeks following Frank's departure plunged me into the darkest period of my life. What began as a shocking discovery of betrayal quickly cascaded into a full-blown financial nightmare that seemed to worsen with each passing day. The first blow came when I attempted to use my credit card at the grocery store, only to have it declined. My cheeks burning with embarrassment, I fumbled through my wallet for cash that wasn't there. I ended up leaving a cart full of groceries behind, driving home in tears to discover all our joint accounts had been drained. Frank had moved quickly, transferring everything to accounts I couldn't access. "This is textbook financial abuse," Donna Lambert said grimly during our first official meeting. Her office was warm and inviting, but nothing could soften the harsh reality she laid out as she reviewed the documents I'd gathered. "He's isolated you financially, damaged your credit, and created debt in your name without your knowledge or consent." "How bad is it?" I asked, bracing myself. Donna's expression was compassionate but direct. "Total debt in your name or jointly held appears to be just over $200,000. The mortgage has been refinanced to the point where you have almost no equity left in the house. Your credit score has dropped to 520, which will make it nearly impossible to get new credit or loans." The room seemed to tilt sideways as the magnitude of Frank's betrayal crystallized into concrete numbers. "Can I fight this? Prove I didn't. Authorize these loans?" "You can," she nodded. "But identity theft cases involving spouses are complicated and time-consuming. We'll pursue that avenue, but you need to prepare for immediate financial survival." Survival became my singular focus. In the days that followed, I opened a new bank account at a different institution, using Donna's address to prevent Frank from finding it. Penelope loaned me enough cash to get through the first week while I scrambled to understand the extent of the damage. The house I had loved, our forever home, became a symbol of Frank's deception. Every corner held memories now tainted by the knowledge that, while I'd been planning our future, he'd been systematically undermining it. I couldn't afford the mortgage payments, which I discovered were nearly double what Frank had told me due, to a second mortgage he'd taken out. When I finally made it to Meridian's office to collect my personal belongings, I found the doors locked, a notice of eviction posted prominently. Employees gathered outside, confusion and anger etched on their faces. No one had been paid for the past month. Client retainers had vanished. Frank hadn't been seen in days. "Did you know about this?" demanded Roy, the senior developer who had been with the company since before I joined. "Were you part of this scam?" The accusation stung, but I understood their anger. "I knew nothing," I admitted. "I'm as blindsided as you are." Some believed me, others clearly didn't. I couldn't blame them. I was the wife of the man who had disappeared with their livelihoods, leaving nothing but debt and broken promises. "I trusted you both," Pippa said, tears streaming down her face. "I turned down a job offer last month because Frank promised me a promotion and raise." Her words were a knife to my heart. These people had been more than colleagues. They'd been my work family. Now they were collateral damage in Frank's web of deceit, and there was nothing I could do to help them. As I drove away from Meridian's office for the last time, the full weight of my new reality pressed down on me. I was unemployed, with no income, drowning in debt I hadn't created, my professional reputation potentially in tatters, and my husband, the architect of this disaster, had vanished. That night, sitting alone in the kitchen of a house I could no longer afford, I reached my lowest point. The silence was deafening. Every buzz of my phone triggered a surge of anxiety. Another creditor, another demand, another piece of evidence revealing the extent of Frank's betrayal. Sleep became elusive, meals forgotten. I moved through the days in a fog of disbelief and despair. "You need to file for bankruptcy," my attorney advised during a consultation that cost money I didn't have. Chapter 7 would give you a fresh start, wipe out most of this unsecured debt. And my credit? My reputation? Both will take a significant hit, she acknowledged. But they're already damaged. This gives you a pathway forward. Forward. The word seemed absurd when I couldn't see beyond surviving the next day, the next bill, the next humiliating conversation with a collection agency questioning charges I'd never made. I put the house on the market, knowing a short sale was likely the best outcome I could hope for. Each showing felt like an invasion, strangers walking through the ruins of the life I'd thought I was building. When an offer came in far below market value, I had no choice but to accept it. The alternative was foreclosure. Moving day brought its own special kind of pain. I'd rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment, all I could afford and all I could get approved for with my devastated credit score. As I packed up what remained of my life, I found myself sorting through physical remnants of my relationship with Frank. Wedding photos, anniversary cards with promises of forever. The business plan we'd drafted together in the early days of our marriage, full of shared dreams and ambitions. In a moment of raw emotion, I gathered everything connected to Frank and our marriage and stuffed it into a garbage bag. Then I sat on the floor of our empty living room and wept, not for the loss of Frank, but for the loss of the woman I had been. Confident, trusting, accomplished. She seemed like a stranger now, her certainties destroyed, her professional identity in shambles, her future a terrifying blank. The bankruptcy filing was perhaps the most humiliating moment of all. Sitting in a sterile government office, detailing every asset, every debt, every financial decision, including the many made without my knowledge or consent, the court-appointed trustee's expression remained neutral, but I imagined judgment in every question, every note taken. "Ms. Bishop, are you currently employed?" "No," I admitted. "The company where I worked, my husband's company, collapsed when he left." "And you have no other income?" "I'm looking for work, but—" My voice trailed off. How could I explain that every job application felt like another opportunity for rejection? That the thought of explaining my situation to potential employers filled me with paralyzing dread? I left the bankruptcy office feeling hollow, empty of everything except shame and fear. The spiral of negativity that had begun with Frank's betrayal seemed to have no bottom, no endpoint. Each day brought new evidence of how thoroughly he had destroyed the life we'd built, and how completely I had failed to see it coming. On the darkest night, exactly 6 weeks after Frank had walked out the door, I found myself sitting on the floor of my sparse apartment, surrounded by past due notices and legal documents. In that moment of complete desolation, something unexpected happened, something that would later mark the true turning point in my journey. I became angry, not the fleeting anger that had come and gone in waves since Frank's deception was revealed. This was different, a steady, clarifying rage that burned away the fog of victimhood that had enveloped me. This anger didn't consume, it illuminated. I still remember that night vividly, sitting cross-legged on the bare floor of my apartment, surrounded by the paperwork of my financial destruction. The cheap overhead light buzzed faintly, casting harsh shadows across the collection notices, bankruptcy forms, and legal documents that told the story of how thoroughly Frank had dismantled my life. For weeks, I'd been drowning in shame and self-recrimination. How could I have been so blind, so trusting, so foolish? These questions had circled in my mind like vultures, picking away at whatever remnants of self-worth I still possessed. But something shifted that night. As I stared at a particularly condescending letter from a credit card company, one I'd never even opened an account with. The familiar wave of despair suddenly transformed into something else. Pure, clarifying anger. "This is not my fault," I said aloud, my voice echoing in the empty apartment. The simplicity of that statement hit me with unexpected force. This wasn't my fault. I hadn't created this situation. I had been deliberately deceived by someone who had systematically abused my trust while isolating me from financial knowledge. I stood up, my legs stiff from sitting too long, and walked to the bathroom mirror. The woman who looked back at me was pale, with dark circles under her eyes and a tension in her jaw that hadn't been there 6 months ago. But behind the exhaustion, I saw something else, a spark of the person I used to be. The woman who had managed million-dollar projects, who had earned the respect of her colleagues, who had built systems and solutions that worked. "You didn't disappear," I told my reflection. "You're still in there." That night marked my transition, from victim to survivor. I didn't sleep. Instead, I cleared the kitchen table and began to do what I'd always done best: analyze a complex problem and develop a strategic solution. By dawn, I had filled a notebook with plans, possibilities, and concrete steps forward. The path wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since Frank's betrayal, I could see one. The next morning, I called Penelope, who had been checking on me regularly despite my increasingly withdrawn responses. "I need your help," I said when she answered, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Name it," she replied without hesitation. "I need to rebuild my life and I can't do it alone. Can you come over? Bring coffee. It's going to be a long conversation." Penelope arrived an hour later with not just coffee but bagels and a fierce determination that matched the newfound resolve burning inside me. As I laid out my situation in brutal detail, no more hiding or sugarcoating the reality, her expression shifted from concern to outrage to grim determination. "That manipulative, fraudulent bastard," she said when I finally finished. "Rachel, why didn't you tell me how bad it was?" "Shame," I admitted. Humiliation. Fear that people would see me exactly as Frank described me. Financially incompetent, naive and over my head. "No one who knows you would ever think that," Penelope said firmly. "This isn't a reflection on you. It's criminal behavior by someone who deliberately exploited your trust." Her words were like a balm on a wound that had been festering for weeks. The validation from someone I respected professionally helped solidify the clarity I'd found the night before. "I want to fight back," I told her. "Not just survive this, but come back stronger." "I know that sounds impossible right now, but—" "It doesn't sound impossible at all," Penelope interrupted. "It sounds exactly like the Rachel I've always known. The question is, where do we start?" Where indeed? With my credit destroyed, minimal, savings and bankruptcy proceedings underway, my options seemed severely limited. But the strategic thinking that had made me an effective project manager hadn't disappeared. It had just been temporarily buried under an avalanche of trauma. "First, I need income," I said. "Something that doesn't require a credit check or extensive background scrutiny, at least for now. The bankruptcy will clean most of the slate, but that takes time." Penelope nodded thoughtfully. "What about freelance? Project management? I know at least 3 small businesses that could use your systems expertise. No formal employment necessary." It wasn't ideal. Freelance work meant irregular income and no benefits, but it was a starting point. Within days, Penelope had connected me with her network, and I had my first client, a local bakery struggling to scale up their operations to meet growing demand. The owner, Julia, didn't care about my personal financial situation. She only cared that I could help streamline her production scheduling and delivery logistics. The project wasn't glamorous or particularly lucrative, but sitting at her flour-dusted table, mapping out process improvements, I felt the first stirrings of professional confidence returning. "You just saved me about 20 hours a week," Julia said after implementing my initial recommendations. How did you see solutions that were right in front of me all along? Sometimes it takes an outside perspective, I replied. When you're in the middle of the daily chaos, it's hard to see the patterns. As I drove home that evening, her words resonated on a deeper level. Perhaps that was true of my marriage as well. I had been too close, too immersed in daily life with Frank to recognize the patterns of deception and control. With one successful project under my belt, others followed. Word spread through Penelope's network about my ability to create order from chaos, to develop systems that solved real business problems. I worked longer hours than I ever had at Meridian, for far less money. But each completed project rebuilt something more valuable than my bank account, my sense of professional identity and self-worth. The bankruptcy proceedings continued, a grueling process of financial autopsy that forced me to confront the full extent of Frank's betrayal. But now, I approached each meeting, each form, each disclosure with a different mindset. This wasn't just about surviving a disaster, it was about learning from it, understanding the mechanisms that had made it possible, and ensuring I would never be vulnerable in the same way again. I began educating myself about personal finance, devouring books, podcasts, and online courses. Concepts that Frank had deliberately mystified, claiming they were too complex for me to understand, revealed themselves to be quite manageable with proper explanation. The more I learned, the more I recognized how deliberately he had kept me in the dark. Financial literacy isn't just about knowledge, it's about power, explained a financial counselor at a free workshop for bankruptcy filers. When someone controls information about money, they control major life decisions. That insight crystallized something important. Frank's financial abuse hadn't been just about the money itself, but about power and control. By excluding me from our financial reality, he had effectively removed my agency in our shared life. 3. Months after my night of clarity, I sat in a coffee shop with Penelope, reviewing my progress. The freelance work had stabilized into something resembling a consistent income. The bankruptcy court had discharged most of the fraudulent debt, though my credit remained in shambles. I had moved to an even smaller apartment to further reduce expenses, embracing minimalism less as a lifestyle choice and more as a survival strategy. "You're doing amazing," Penelope said, genuine admiration in her voice. "Most people would still be in the fetal position after what you've been through." I managed a small smile. Some days, the fetal position still calls to me. But I'm starting to see beyond survival now. I'm starting to think about what comes next. "And what does come next?" she asked. I hesitated, uncertain whether to share. The seedling of an idea that had begun to take root in my mind. It seemed audacious, perhaps even foolhardy given my circumstances. But the clarity that had come that night on my apartment floor hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had grown stronger with each small victory. "I'm not sure yet," I said finally. "But I know it's going to be on my terms this time." 6 months after. My world imploded. I stood before the mirror in my tiny apartment bathroom, dressed in a suit I'd found at a consignment shop. The woman staring back at me looked different, leaner, sharper somehow, with a determined set to her jaw that hadn't been there before. I was preparing for a meeting that could change everything. "You can do this," I told my reflection, straightening my shoulders. "You've prepared. You know what you're talking about." The meeting was with Alex Rodriguez, CFO of Westbrook Industries, one of Meridian's former clients. After weeks of persistent networking and carefully crafted emails, he had finally agreed to a 30-minute coffee meeting. It wasn't much, but it was an opening, and I intended to make the most of it. When Meridian collapsed, Frank hadn't just left me with personal debt. He'd also left dozens of clients with unfinished projects, unfulfilled promises, and in some cases, prepaid services never delivered. While I couldn't fix everything Frank had broken, I had begun to see these abandoned clients as both a responsibility and an opportunity. The coffee shop was busy when I arrived, but I spotted Alex immediately, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a skeptical expression that didn't soften when I approached. "Mr. Rodriguez, thank you for meeting with me," I said, extending my hand. His handshake was brief, non-committal. "I'll be honest, Ms. Bishop," he said as we sat down. "I only agreed to this meeting out of curiosity. Westbrook lost a significant amount of money when Meridian collapsed, and your husband's disappearing act left a sour taste." "I understand completely," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. "And first, I want to apologize for what happened. While I wasn't aware of Frank's decisions, I was part of Meridian, and I feel responsible for making things right." His eyebrow raised slightly. "You're not legally obligated to do that. This isn't about legal obligation. It's about professional integrity." I opened my portfolio and placed a document on the table between us. "This is a detailed analysis of where your project stood when Meridian collapsed, what would be needed to complete it properly, and how I believe I can deliver that completion within your original budget parameters." Alex glanced at the document, then back at me, surprise evident in his expression. "You've done all this work without any guarantee I'd even consider hiring you?" "I did it because it was the right thing to do," I said simply. "Westbrook deserved better than what happened, and I have the skills to fix it, if you're willing to trust me." For the next 20 minutes, I walked him through my analysis and proposal. I had studied Westbrook's business model extensively, identified the critical gaps the Meridian project had been intended to fill, and developed a streamlined approach to deliver the essential functionality they needed. "This is surprisingly thorough," Alex admitted as he flipped through my notes. "But why should we trust you after what happened with Meridian?" It was the question I had anticipated, the one I had rehearsed answering dozens of times in my apartment. Yet in that moment, I abandoned my carefully prepared response for something more honest. "You shouldn't trust me based on words alone," I said. "I was victimized by Frank's deception just as your company was. The difference is, I'm still here, facing the consequences and trying to make things right. I'm not asking for blind trust. I'm asking for a chance to demonstrate through actions that I can deliver what I promise." Alex studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he closed the portfolio and slid it back across the table. "We can't engage you as a vendor," he said, and my heart sank. "Our legal department would never approve it after the Meridian fiasco." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "I understand. Thank you for your time. However," he continued, "I could bring you in as an independent contractor reporting directly to me, off the books for this specific project recovery. If you deliver as promised, we can discuss a more formal arrangement." It wasn't ideal. Off the books meant minimal pay and no job security, but it was a foot in the door, a chance to prove myself. I accepted immediately. That small beginning, one client, one project, one opportunity to demonstrate my capabilities, became the foundation for what followed. The Westbrook Recovery Project consumed my days and nights for 3 weeks, but when I delivered the completed work, on time and with additional features Alex hadn't even requested, the appreciation in his eyes was worth every exhausting hour. "I've been in this business for 25 years, he told me during our final review meeting, "and I've rarely seen someone deliver complex work with this level of precision and thoroughness, especially under the circumstances." Word spread. Alex recommended me to colleagues at other companies. Former Meridian clients who had written off their losses as a bad investment began to reach out, cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence as my reputation for salvaging abandoned projects grew. Within 3 months, I had established a small but growing client base and a clear focus: project recovery specialization. I wasn't competing with full-service agencies. I was filling a specific niche, helping companies restore value from technology investments that had gone sideways, whether through mismanagement, scope creep, or vendor collapse. My apartment's second bedroom transformed into a home office, where sticky notes and whiteboards covered the walls with project timelines and system diagrams. I invested my limited funds carefully, prioritizing the tools and software that would make me more efficient rather than luxuries like new clothes or furniture. The bankruptcy discharge finally came through, removing the worst of the fraudulent debt Frank had created. My credit remained severely damaged, but at least I was no longer drowning. Each small client payment helped me build a modest financial cushion, the beginnings of security after months of constant precarity. This period wasn't just about professional rebuilding. I was also reconstructing my sense of self, separate from the identity I'd held as Frank's wife and partner. I joined a support group for survivors of financial abuse, where shared stories helped me understand that what had happened wasn't unique to me. It was a recognized pattern of control and exploitation. The hardest part, shared Farah, another woman in the group, is that financial abuse doesn't leave visible bruises. People don't understand why you let it happen or why you didn't see the signs. Her words resonated deeply. The invisible nature of financial abuse had made it difficult to explain to others, and even harder to process myself. The support group gave me language for my experience and validation that I wasn't alone. With each client I helped, each invoice I sent, each project I successfully completed, I reclaimed a piece of my professional identity. The work itself became therapeutic, concrete problems I could solve, systems I could organize, deliverables I could control. Unlike the swirling chaos of my personal life, these projects had clear parameters and measurable success criteria. One particularly meaningful milestone came when I hired my first subcontractor, Bobby, the former lead developer from Meridian, who had initially questioned whether I'd been complicit in Frank's schemes. When a client project required technical expertise beyond my capabilities, I reached out to him hesitantly, unsure if he would even take my call. "I owe you an apology," he said immediately when we connected. "I blamed you for Frank's actions, because you were the easiest target." That wasn't fair. His willingness to collaborate marked a turning point. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something new from the ashes of what Frank had destroyed. As my first year of independence drew to a close, I sat at my makeshift desk, reviewing my modest but growing client list and the steadily increasing balance in my business account. The journey had been grueling, filled with setbacks, sleepless nights, and moments of doubt. But the foundation I had built felt solid in a way my life with Frank never truly had. What I didn't realize then was that Frank's shadow had not yet fully receded from my life. His final act of destruction and my most audacious response still lay ahead. The first anniversary of my financial liberation, the day I'd discovered Frank's deception and shown him the door, passed without fanfare. I was too busy to commemorate it, working late into the night on proposals for 2 potential new clients. What once had been a one-woman operation run from my apartment was evolving into something more substantial. Phoenix Recovery Solutions, read the new business cards. I'd finally allowed myself to order. The name had come to me during a rare moment of downtime, a simple metaphor for both my personal journey and the service I provided to clients. Bringing projects back from the ashes of failure. My client roster had grown to include 15 companies, ranging from small local businesses to 2 mid-sized corporations. While the work remained challenging, each failed project presented unique complications. I had developed a methodology that consistently delivered results. The word-of-mouth referrals had become my primary source of new business. "I need more help," I admitted to Penelope over lunch. "I'm turning down work because I can't handle the volume." "That's called success," she reminded me with a smile. "Embrace it." Taking that leap, from solo practitioner to employer, required both practical and psychological shifts. I had to believe in my business model enough to invest in its growth, to trust that the momentum I'd built would continue. After Frank's betrayal, trust of any kind didn't come easily, but the numbers didn't lie. My spreadsheets showed consistent revenue growth month over month. Client satisfaction surveys reflected overwhelmingly positive feedback. The market need for my specialized recovery services wasn't diminishing. If anything, it was expanding as more companies invested in digital transformation initiatives that frequently went off the rails. I signed a lease on a small office space. Nothing fancy, just a 2-room suite in a building housing various professional services. Having a physical address rather than a P.O. box lent Phoenix Recovery Solutions the legitimacy needed to pursue larger clients. Bobby, who had been working with me as a contractor, became my first full-time employee. Pippa, the talented designer, from Meridian, joined shortly thereafter. Seeing their email signatures with the Phoenix Recovery logo filled me with a complex mixture of pride and responsibility. These people were entrusting their livelihoods to me, a trust I vowed never to betray. "We need proper project management software," Bobby pointed out one afternoon as we juggled multiple client deadlines. "These spreadsheets worked when it was just you, but we're outgrowing them." He was right, of course. The makeshift systems I developed were buckling under the increased workload, but investing in enterprise software meant a significant financial commitment, something that still triggered anxiety given my history. "Let me research options," I said, pushing past the discomfort. "We'll implement something before the end of the month." This became the pattern of growth, identifying bottlenecks, making strategic investments, developing more sophisticated systems as the business expanded. Each step forward required confronting the lingering financial trauma Frank had left me with, the instinctive fear that accompanied any significant expenditure or commitment. The turning point came with a call from Alex Rodriguez at Westbrook, the client who had given me my first chance. "Rachel, we have a situation," he began without preamble. "The implementation firm handling our enterprise resource planning system just went bankrupt midway through deployment. We're looking at a potential 7-figure loss if we can't salvage the project." My heart raced. This was an order of magnitude larger than anything Phoenix had handled before. More complex, higher stakes, potentially far more lucrative. "Send me what you have," I replied, projecting a confidence I wasn't entirely sure I felt. "Let me see what we're dealing with." The documentation arrived within the hour. Hundreds of pages of technical specifications, half-implemented features, and project plans in various states of completion. I cleared my schedule and dove in, working through the night to understand the scope of the disaster and whether we could realistically rescue it. By morning, I had my answer. Yes, but not alone. We would need to expand our team temporarily, bringing in specialized expertise for specific components of the system. I presented my assessment to Alex in a video call, outlining both the recovery pathway and the additional resources required. "This is beyond Phoenix's current capacity," I admitted frankly. "But I can assemble and manage the team needed to get it done. It will require a larger budget than your typical recovery project." Alex studied me through the screen. "You're not overselling your capabilities? Because we cannot afford another failure here." "I never promise what I can't deliver," I replied. "That's the foundation Phoenix is built on." After a pause that felt eternal, he nodded. "Send me the proposal by end of day. I'll push it through on my authority." The Westbrook ERP recovery became Phoenix's watershed project, the one that transformed us from a boutique recovery specialist to a serious player in the technology consulting space. I hired 6 contractors with specific expertise, rented additional office space to accommodate the expanded team, and personally oversaw every aspect of the complex rescue operation. For 3 months, I worked 16-hour days, pushing myself, harder than I ever had before. The technical challenges were immense, the stakeholder management even more demanding. Corporate politics and competing priorities threatened to derail our efforts at every turn, but we delivered. The system went live with core functionality intact, saving Westbrook millions in potential losses and preserving years of implementation work. When the final module passed testing, the entire Phoenix team, permanent and temporary members alike, gathered for a champagne toast. "To Rachel," Bobby proposed, raising his glass, "who taught us all that setbacks are just setups for comebacks." The room echoed with agreement, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to fully absorb what we had accomplished. Not just with the Westbrook project, but with Phoenix itself, a company built from nothing, fueled by determination and expertise, rather than outside investment or inherited advantages. The successful Westbrook rescue opened doors that had previously been firmly closed. Corporate clients who would never have considered a small recovery firm for major projects now reached out directly. Industry publications requested interviews about our methodology. A technology conference invited me to speak about Project Rescue, best practices. Phoenix Recovery Solutions was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. We expanded to 12 full-time employees and a network of trusted contractors. Our service offerings grew beyond pure recovery work to include project audits, risk assessments, and implementation oversight, preventing disasters rather than just cleaning them up afterward. With financial stability came the ability to address the personal aftermath of Frank's betrayal more effectively. I began working with a therapist specializing in financial trauma, gradually unwinding the anxiety that still surfaced around money decisions. I moved from my cramped apartment to a modest but comfortable condo, purchased with a hard-won mortgage approval despite my still recovering credit score. Each milestone, hiring another employee, signing a larger client, implementing more sophisticated business systems, felt like reclaiming a piece of professional confidence that Frank had tried to destroy. The woman who had once been told she was financially incompetent now ran financial projections, negotiated six-figure contracts, and made investment decisions for a growing business. But even as Phoenix flourished, one particular news alert I'd set up remained silent. Any mention of Frank Bishop or the remnants of Meridian Solutions. Whatever had happened to my ex-husband and the company we had once built together remained a mystery, until the day my phone buzzed with a notification that would present the most unexpected opportunity of all. The notification that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon as I reviewed quarterly projections with my small leadership team. My phone buzzed briefly, displaying a news alert I had set up months ago but had almost forgotten about. Meridian Solutions assets to be auctioned. Following bankruptcy proceedings, I managed to maintain my composure through the remainder of the meeting, but my mind was racing. After Frank's disappearance, Meridian had apparently been placed in receivership, its remaining assets frozen while creditors and legal proceedings determined its fate. Now, those assets, whatever remained of them, would be sold to the highest bidder. When everyone had left, I closed my office door and searched for more information. The auction was scheduled for 3 weeks from now, a standard liquidation procedure to recover whatever value remained for Meridian's creditors. Listed assets included office equipment, client contracts, though it was unclear if any were still valid, proprietary software, and intellectual property. I leaned back in my chair, unexpected emotions washing over me. Meridian had been the center of my life for years, first as a shared dream with Frank, then as the site of my professional marginalization, and finally as the corporate shell game that had nearly destroyed me financially. Now it was being dismantled, its pieces sold off like furniture at an estate sale. My first instinct was to ignore the auction entirely. Phoenix was thriving. Why look backward? Why tie myself to painful memories and a failed business? But as I scrolled through the asset listing, something caught my eye. Proprietary client management system and associated codebase, including Wavelength Analytics module. The Wavelength Analytics module had been Meridian's crown jewel, an innovative approach to customer journey mapping that Frank had developed early in the company's life. It had been brilliantly conceived but poorly executed under his management. Still, The underlying concept had been solid, with potential far beyond what Meridian had achieved with it. I brought up Phoenix's strategic plan, the document that outlined our growth trajectory for the next 3 years. We had identified a need for better analytics tools to support our expanding services. Building something from scratch would take months of development time and significant investment. But what if we didn't have to start from zero? That evening, I called Bobby, who had been with Meridian from its early days and understood the wavelength system better than anyone except perhaps Frank himself. If we acquired the wavelength code at auction, could we actually use it? I asked, pacing my living room. Is there real value there, or is it too tied to Meridian's infrastructure? Bobby was quiet for a moment. The core architecture is sound, he said finally. Frank's vision for it was actually brilliant. He just didn't have the discipline to implement it properly or the patience to fix the bugs. With some significant refactoring, it could be extremely valuable, especially given what you're trying to build with Phoenix. The next morning, I called an emergency strategy meeting with my leadership team, Bobby for technology, Pippa for user experience, and Penelope, who had recently joined Phoenix to head our finance and operations. I'm considering bidding on Meridian's assets at the upcoming bankruptcy auction, I announced without preamble. Specifically, the wavelength analytics system. The room fell silent. They all knew my history with Meridian, understood the complicated emotions tied to anything connected with Frank and my former life. This isn't about sentimentality or revenge, I continued, addressing the unspoken concerns. This is about strategic acquisition. Wavelength could accelerate our product roadmap by at least 6 months if we can successfully integrate and improve it. Bobby nodded slowly. Technically, it makes sense. But Rachel, are you sure you want to tie Phoenix to anything connected with Meridian? With Frank? It was the central question, the one I'd been asking myself since seeing the auction notice. Was I allowing emotions to cloud my business judgment? Was this a strategic opportunity or a psychological trap? I spent too long allowing Frank to control my financial and professional life, I replied. I won't give him power over Phoenix's strategic decisions as well. If wavelength is valuable, we should pursue it, regardless of its origins. Over the following week, we conducted a thorough analysis. Bobby reviewed the technical documentation available through the bankruptcy filing. Penelope prepared financial projections based on different acquisition and integration scenarios. I consulted with our attorney about potential liabilities or encumbrances. The more we examined it, the clearer the opportunity became. Wavelength wasn't just a useful tool, it could be transformative for Phoenix, allowing us to offer predictive analytics alongside our recovery services. The data-driven insights would position us as thought leaders rather than just skilled implementers. 2 weeks before the auction, I gathered the team again to present our formal acquisition strategy. Here's what we know, I began, bringing up the first slide of my presentation. The bankruptcy trustee values the Meridian assets at approximately $150,000 total. The wavelength system represents roughly 1/3 of that value according to their assessment. I clicked to the next slide, showing our financial analysis. Based on our projections, acquiring and integrating Wavelength would cost us approximately $85,000. $50,000 for the acquisition if bidding goes as expected, plus $35,000 for integration and enhancement. Penelope picked up the thread, highlighting the financial model she'd developed. The ROI timeline shows break-even within 9 months if we implement according to the phased approach Rachel and Bobby have outlined. After that, it becomes a significant revenue driver, especially for our larger clients who need predictive capabilities. As the presentation continued, I could feel the energy in the room shift from skepticism to cautious excitement. This wasn't just about acquiring a piece of software, it was about accelerating Phoenix's evolution from a recovery specialist to a full-spectrum technology consultancy. There's one more factor to consider, I said as we neared the end of the meeting. Frank may show up at this auction. If he does, and if he recognizes what we're doing, he might try to prevent us from acquiring Wavelength, either out of spite or because he recognizes its value. The room fell silent again, the mention of Frank's name still carrying emotional weight even after all this time. So, what's our strategy if that happens? Bobby asked finally. I smiled, bringing up the final slide of my presentation, a detailed bidding strategy with contingencies for various scenarios. We'll be prepared, I said simply, for whatever and whoever we might encounter at that auction. As the team filed out, energized by our plan, Penelope lingered behind. This isn't just business for you, she said quietly. It can't be. I considered denying it, insisting that my interest was purely strategic. But Penelope deserved better than that. No, I admitted. It's not just business, but that doesn't mean it isn't the right business decision. She nodded, understanding. Just be sure you know which one you're acting on when you're in that auction room. Her words stayed with me in the days that followed as we refined our strategy, secured financing, and prepared for every contingency we could imagine. The line between strategic vision and personal vindication was perhaps thinner than I wanted to admit, but I was determined to make this decision with clear eyes and sound judgment. Wavelength would be valuable to Phoenix. That much was objectively true. Whether acquiring it would also provide some measure of personal closure was a question I wasn't quite ready to answer. The morning of the auction dawned clear and cold. I stood in front of my closet, deliberating longer than necessary over what to wear. This wasn't vanity. It was armor selection. I finally settled on a charcoal gray suit with a deep blue blouse, professional, confident, with nothing that could be mistaken for emotional investment in the proceedings ahead. Remember, we have a strict ceiling, Penelope cautioned as we drove to the county courthouse. She had insisted on coming as moral support, though only I would be bidding. $80,000 absolute maximum for the whole package, $50,000. If we can get Wavelength separately. I nodded, reviewing the bidding strategy we'd developed. The auction would sell Meridian's assets in lots, with the opportunity to bid on individual components or the entire package. Our analysis suggested most bidders would be interested in the client list or office equipment, rather than the proprietary software. Most wouldn't understand its value without intimate knowledge of Meridian's operations. Any word from our courthouse contact? I asked. Penelope checked her phone. Julie just texted. Registration is underway. 12 bidders so far. She paused. No sign of Frank. I'd had Julie, a paralegal friend, keeping an eye on the registration desk. Frank's absence would simplify things emotionally, though I'd prepared myself for his possible presence. The courthouse parking lot was sparsely populated when we arrived, mostly vehicles with commercial plates, representing liquidation companies and asset recovery specialists. These were professional vultures who attended bankruptcies and foreclosures as a business model, looking for undervalued items they could flip for profit. Inside, the auction was being held in a medium-sized conference room rather than a courtroom. Metal folding chairs faced a podium where the auctioneer would stand. Tables along one wall displayed photographs and descriptions of the physical assets being sold, while digital assets were listed in a catalog provided to registered bidders. We checked in, receiving bidder number 29, and took seats near the back, providing a clear view of everyone entering. Penelope reviewed the catalog while I surveyed the room, assessing our competition. Most appeared to be the liquidators I'd expected, along with a few technology company representatives likely interested in specific equipment. 10 minutes before the scheduled start, the door opened, and I felt Penelope stiffen beside me. Rachel, she whispered. 3 o'clock. I turned slightly, my breath catching as I recognized the man who had just entered. Not Frank, but Roy Williams, Meridian's former sales director who had worked closely with Frank for years. Roy had been one of Frank's most loyal supporters, often echoing his dismissive attitude toward my role in the company. Our eyes met across the room, recognition dawning on his face. His initial surprise quickly morphed into something harder as he deliberately turned away, joining a small group near the front. "He's not here for office furniture," Penelope murmured. "No," I agreed. "He's here for Wavelength." This complicated things. Roy understood the software's potential as well as anyone. If he was bidding, likely with backing from investors, our carefully calculated price ceiling might not be enough. Before we could discuss further, the auctioneer called the room to order, and the proceedings began. The first lots, office furniture, computer equipment, and miscellaneous supplies, sold quickly, mostly to the liquidation specialists. I remained still, bidding paddle untouched in my lap. Next up, Lot 17. Meridian Solutions client list and associated contract documentation. Starting bid $5,000. Several paddles went up immediately. This was a potentially valuable asset. Even expired contracts provided pathways to new business development. The bidding quickly escalated to $12,000 before settling. I remained motionless, focused on our primary target. Lot 18. Meridian Solutions proprietary software assets, including content management system, client portal framework, and wavelength analytics module. Starting bid $10,000. I raised my paddle smoothly, projecting a confidence I didn't entirely feel. From the corner of my eye, I saw Roy turn to look at me, then raise his own paddle in response. $15,000, the auctioneer called. I nodded, raising my paddle again. $20,000. Roy's paddle shot up immediately. $25,000. The pattern continued, the price climbing steadily. Most other bidders dropped out once it passed $30,000. This specialized software held little value for general buyers. Soon it was just Roy and me, the bids increasing, in $5,000 increments. At $45,000, I hesitated momentarily. We were approaching our ceiling, and Roy showed no signs of backing down. I glanced at Penelope, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod. We had discussed stretching our limit if the situation warranted. $50,000, I called, voice steady. Roy smirked slightly. $55,000. The room had grown quiet, other bidders watching the duel with interest. I could feel sweat beading at my hairline as I raised my paddle again. $60,000. Roy leaned over to confer with a man beside him, then straightened. $65,000. We were now well beyond our original ceiling. The software was valuable, but not infinitely so, and Phoenix's finances weren't unlimited. I needed to make a cold business decision, not an emotional one. $70,000, I said, hearing Penelope's sharp intake of breath beside me. Roy's jaw tightened. $75,000, the auctioneer looked to me expectantly. $75,000 going once. In that suspended moment, clarity washed over me. This wasn't about beating Roy or reclaiming a piece of Meridian. This was about Phoenix's future and making sound decisions for the company I had built from nothing. $80,000, I said, my final offer. Roy's face flushed. He conferred, again with his companion, their exchange appearing heated. Finally, he shook his head slightly. $80,000 going once. Going twice. Sold to bidder 29. A curious lightness filled me as the auctioneer moved on to the next lot. I had just committed more money than we'd planned, but I'd done it for the right reasons. Strategic value, not emotional satisfaction. As we completed the paperwork and payment arrangements, Roy approached, his expression unreadable. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, hands shoved in his pockets. "Business opportunity," I replied neutrally. He studied me for a moment. "Frank always said you didn't understand Meridian's value. Guess he was wrong about that too." The acknowledgement, however reluctant, felt like the closing of a circle. "Frank was wrong about many things," I said simply. Roy nodded once, then glanced at the Phoenix logo on the folder Penelope was holding. Heard you've built something solid. Wavelength will work better in your hands than it ever did in ours. Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving me with the unexpected gift of professional recognition from someone who had once dismissed my capabilities entirely. Outside the courthouse, legal ownership of Wavelength now officially transferred to Phoenix, Penelope turned to me with a mixture of excitement and concern. "We went over budget," she noted, though without criticism. "Yes," I agreed, "but we stayed true to our strategy. This wasn't about Frank or Meridian, it was about Phoenix's future." As we walked to the car, I realized I felt none of the vengeful satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, I felt something much more valuable: the quiet confidence of a business leader who had made a calculated risk based on strategic vision rather than emotional response. The auction represented more than acquiring valuable software. It symbolized my complete transition from Frank's shadow into my own light. What had once been a shared dream, then a tool of exclusion, was now a building block for the future I was creating on my terms. We had the asset. Now came the real work, transforming it into something that would propel Phoenix forward, something that would bear no trace of Frank's flawed execution or questionable ethics. "Ready to build something extraordinary?" I asked Penelope as we pulled away from the courthouse. Her answering smile was all the confirmation I needed. "Beyond ready, let's make this ours." The first weeks after acquiring Wavelength were a whirlwind of focused activity. I had always prided myself on decisive leadership, but the integration of Meridian's former crown jewel into Phoenix's infrastructure demanded an entirely new level of determination. The morning after the auction, I gathered our entire team, now 15 people strong, in the conference room. The energy was palpable as I outlined what we had acquired and the transformation we were about to undertake. "Wavelength isn't just software we're adding to our toolkit," I explained, standing before the whiteboard where I'd mapped out our integration strategy. "It's the cornerstone of Phoenix's evolution. With this technology properly developed and deployed, we'll shift from being primarily reactive, fixing what others have broken, to being proactive and predictive." Bobby took over, walking the team through the technical aspects. "The core architecture is actually elegant," he said, projecting the system diagram on the screen. "But the implementation was rushed and poorly executed. We're essentially getting a brilliant blueprint that was built with substandard materials." "So we're rebuilding it from the ground up?" asked Julia, our newest developer. "Not exactly," I interjected. "We're doing something more surgical. Bobby has identified the components worth salvaging and those requiring complete reconstruction. It's like renovating a house with good bones but serious structural issues." The plan we unveiled was ambitious: a 90-day push to transform Wavelength from a promising but flawed tool into a market-differentiating platform. This would require everyone's contribution, from developers refactoring code to account managers, identifying client projects where we could pilot the enhanced system. "This is an all-hands effort," I emphasized. "I won't pretend it will be easy. We'll be maintaining our existing client commitments while simultaneously undertaking this transformation. But I believe the result will be worth every late night and working weekend." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. The Phoenix team had developed a culture of embracing challenges, of seeing opportunities where others saw only problems. This mindset, so different from the fear-based environment Frank had created at Meridian, was perhaps my proudest achievement. As the meeting concluded, Penelope distributed detailed project plans to each department, while I scheduled individual conversations with key team members. My management style had evolved significantly since my Meridian days. I believed in clear direction, coupled with empowered execution, in contrast to Frank's micromanagement and information hoarding. "I've allocated additional budget for 2 contract developers to help with the refactoring," I told Bobby later that day. "You have complete authority to select who we bring in, The only non-negotiable is the timeline. This approach, setting firm expectations while providing the necessary resources and autonomy, had become Phoenix's hallmark. It created an environment where people felt both challenged and supported, responsible for outcomes but not abandoned in their efforts. The integration process revealed both the brilliance and the flaws in Frank's original vision. Wavelength's core algorithm for analyzing customer interaction patterns was genuinely innovative, capable of identifying subtle correlations that traditional analytics missed. But the implementation was riddled with shortcuts, technical debt, and what Bobby called egotistical coding, needlessly complex solutions designed to showcase cleverness rather than solve problems efficiently. It's like he couldn't help showing off. Even in code no one but developers would ever see, Bobby remarked one evening as we reviewed progress, shaking his head. So much wasted potential. That phrase, wasted potential, struck me deeply. It encapsulated not just what had happened to Wavelength under Frank's leadership, but what had nearly happened to me. The recognition strengthened my resolve to ensure Phoenix would be different, would be better, would fulfill its potential rather than squander it. 3 weeks into our 90-day plan, we encountered the first major obstacle. Julia discovered that a critical component of Wavelength's data processing engine was irreparably flawed. It would need to be completely rebuilt rather than refactored. This will add at least 3 weeks to the timeline, she explained in our emergency meeting, clearly distressed at being the bearer of bad news. I considered the implications carefully. Pushing the timeline would delay client implementations we had already begun discussing. Alternatively, we could bring in additional resources at significant expense, potentially compromising quality in the rush. 5 years ago, faced with such a dilemma, I might have defaulted to the safer option, the one least likely to create waves. But Phoenix wasn't built on playing it safe. It was built on making the right decisions, even when difficult. We rebuild it properly, I decided. We adjust the timeline and communicate transparently with the clients in our pilot group. Quality and integrity come first. The relief on the development team's faces confirmed I'd made the right call. This was the difference between leadership and mere management. The willingness to absorb short-term pain for long-term gain, to prioritize what truly mattered over what seemed expedient. As we progressed deeper into the integration, I found myself working closely with the code Frank had written, the digital fingerprints of the man who had nearly destroyed me. There was something strangely intimate about it, like reading someone's diary years after a relationship had ended. I could see his brilliance, his impatience, his unwillingness to do the unglamorous work of proper implementation. You can see where he lost interest, Bobby pointed out during a code review. The early modules are meticulously architected. Then it gets progressively sloppier, as if he couldn't be bothered with the details once the exciting conceptual work was done. It was Frank in a nutshell. Visionary ideas abandoned before proper execution, responsibility shifted to others without proper guidance, appearances prioritized over substance. Understanding this pattern helped me ensure Phoenix wouldn't repeat Meridian's mistakes. The decisive leadership continued throughout the integration process. When budget overruns threatened in month 2, I made the difficult decision to delay our office expansion rather than compromise the development timeline. When a key client expressed skepticism about our ability to deliver the enhanced platform, I personally guaranteed results, putting my reputation on the line. 67 days after the auction, 23 days ahead of our revised schedule, Bobby sent a company-wide email at 2:37 a.m. It works. All test scenarios passing. This thing is beautiful. The next morning, champagne bottles appeared in the conference room as the team gathered to witness the first full demonstration of Phoenix Wavelength, deliberately renamed to mark its evolution from the Meridian original. The system smoothly processed sample data sets, generating predictive insights that would have taken weeks of manual analysis to produce. This isn't just a renovation. Pippa said as we watched the visualizations render on screen. It's a complete transformation. She was right. What we had created bore only a conceptual resemblance to Frank's original vision. We had preserved what worked, discarded what didn't, and built something far more powerful than what had existed before. As the team celebrated, I stepped into my office for a moment of private reflection. On my desk sat a single printed page, the auction certificate confirming the transfer of Meridian's assets to Phoenix Recovery Solutions. I picked it up, studying it one last time before deliberately feeding it into the shredder. The past had served its purpose. Now it was time to focus entirely on what lay ahead. Ms. Bishop? There's someone here to see you. Julia's voice over the intercom interrupted my concentration as I reviewed the final presentation for tomorrow's pitch to Westbrook Industries. We were proposing a comprehensive digital transformation project, our largest potential contract to date, made possible by Phoenix Wavelength's capabilities. I don't have any appointments this afternoon, I replied, glancing at my calendar to confirm. He doesn't have an appointment. He says it's important. It's Frank Bishop. The name hung in the air, electrifying the silence that followed. Frank, here. After almost 14 months without a word, without a trace. Send him in, I said after a moment, my voice steadier than I expected. I stood, smoothing my skirt and squaring my shoulders. This wasn't the broken woman Frank had abandoned to financial ruin. This was the CEO of a thriving company, a respected industry voice, a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes he'd left behind. When the door opened, the man who entered was simultaneously familiar and a stranger. Frank looked thinner, his once immaculate appearance now merely adequate. The confident swagger had diminished to something more cautious. Only his eyes remained unchanged, calculating, assessing, looking for advantage. Rachel, he said, his voice carrying a forced lightness. You look well. What do you want, Frank? I wasn't going to play whatever game he'd come to initiate. He gestured to the chair across from my desk. May I? I nodded once, retaking my own seat. From this position, me behind the substantial desk, him in the visitor's chair, the power, dynamic was unmistakable. This was my territory, my company, my terms. I've been following Phoenix's growth, he began, settling into the chair. Impressive work. The Westbrook ERP recovery, especially, that made waves in the industry. You didn't come here to compliment my business acumen, I said. What do you want? Frank's smile faltered slightly. Direct as always. Fine. He leaned forward. I've started a new venture, digital transformation consultancy focused on mid-market companies. The business model is solid, the market opportunity substantial. What I need is credibility and certain technical capabilities. The audacity was breathtaking. And you thought I might help you with that? After everything you did? Business is business, Rachel. What happened between us was unfortunate. But we both know we worked well together professionally. Your operational expertise, my vision, it was a powerful combination. I studied him, genuinely curious about the level of self-delusion required to make such a proposal. You left me with $200,000 in fraudulent debt, Frank. You forged my signature on loan documents. You destroyed my credit, nearly bankrupted me, and disappeared without a trace for over a year. And now you're proposing a business collaboration? He had the grace to look momentarily discomfited. I've had some time to reflect. Made some poor decisions, certainly. The market turned against us and I panicked. It wasn't my finest hour. Poor decisions, I echoed incredulously. What you did was criminal. Yet you didn't press charges, he noted, a calculating gleam returning to his eyes. You could have, but you didn't. I think part of you understands that business sometimes requires unconventional measures. The suggestion that my choice not to pursue criminal charges somehow indicated approval of his actions ignited a cold anger within me. I didn't press charges because I was too busy surviving the wreckage you created, I said evenly, and then rebuilding my life without the additional stress of a criminal case. It wasn't forgiveness, Frank. It was prioritization. He shifted strategies, gesturing around at my office. And look what came of it. Phoenix wouldn't exist if things hadn't unfolded as they did. In a way, you could say I catalyzed your success. I almost laughed at the transparent attempt to reframe his betrayal as some kind of twisted gift. Is that how you justify it to yourself? That you did me a favor by committing fraud and identity theft? I'm simply observing that good things can emerge from difficult circumstances, he replied smoothly. And now we have an opportunity to build something together again, this time as equals. I studied him for a long moment, seeing with perfect clarity what I had missed years ago. The hollow center behind the charismatic facade, the fundamental inability to take genuine responsibility for his actions. No, I said simply. No? He repeated, as if the word were foreign to him. No, I confirmed, standing to signal the end of our meeting. I don't need a partner, Frank. I don't need your vision or your connections or whatever else you're offering. What I've built here works precisely, because it's nothing like what we had at Meridian. The rejection landed visibly, his confidence cracking further. You're making a mistake. My new approach? Goodbye, Frank, I interrupted, pressing the intercom. Julia, please show Mr. Bishop out. As he rose reluctantly, a final realization struck me. I felt nothing. No anger, no vindication, not even satisfaction. Frank Bishop had become irrelevant to my story, a character from an earlier chapter, with no role in the pages yet to be written. 1 week after Frank's unwelcome visit, I arrived at Phoenix's office to find Penelope waiting for me, her expression uncharacteristically tense. We need to talk, she said, following me into my office, without waiting for an invitation. Privately, I set down my bag, concern mounting at her unusual urgency. What's happened? She closed the door before turning to face me. Remember that background check we ran on Westbrook's new technology officer before our big pitch? Well, I had a hunch and ran the same process on Frank's new company. Frank's company? Why would... You... Just look, she interrupted, placing a folder on my desk. Ascension Digital Consulting, incorporated 3 months ago. I opened the folder, scanning the documentation Penelope had compiled. Frank was indeed listed as CEO, but what caught my attention was another name among the company officers, Alex Rodriguez, Westbrook's former CFO, the man who had given me my first chance after Meridian's collapse. Alex is working with Frank? I asked, struggling to process this unexpected connection. Not just working with him. He's a founding partner and primary investor, Penelope said grimly. And there's more. Westbrook's new technology officer? He reported to Alex for 5 years before Alex left. The implications crystallized with sickening clarity. Thereafter, the Westbrook contract. Penelope nodded. The pitch we've been preparing for tomorrow? I've confirmed that Ascension is presenting immediately after us. I sank into my chair, mind racing. The Westbrook Digital Transformation Project was potentially worth millions, the largest opportunity in Phoenix's history. We had invested weeks in the proposal, tailoring our approach to Westbrook's specific needs and challenges. Losing it would be a significant blow, but losing it to Frank would be unbearable. Do you think Alex orchestrated this? I asked. Giving me that first project, recommending Phoenix to others. Was he just setting us up to gather intelligence for Frank? Penelope shook her head. I don't think so. The timing doesn't work. Alex left Westbrook 8 months ago. Frank only incorporated Ascension 3 months back. But they clearly connected afterward, and Alex knows exactly what made Phoenix successful, with Westbrook in the past. I stared at the company overview in the folder. Ascension's service offerings mirrored Phoenix's with uncanny precision, right down to the predictive analytics capabilities we had developed through our refinement of wavelength. How would they know about our enhanced analytics platform? We've been careful about public disclosure. That's the other shoe, Penelope said, flipping to another page. Roy Williams is listed as their chief technology officer. Roy, the man who had bid against me at the auction, who had known exactly what wavelength could do if properly implemented. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was deeply troubling. They're positioning directly against us, I said quietly, using inside knowledge from both Meridian and Westbrook to undercut our proposal. It gets worse, Penelope continued. I spoke with my contact in Westbrook's finance department this morning. Apparently, Ascension is offering a guarantee we can't match, implementation at cost, with payment contingent on performance metrics being achieved. That's not sustainable, I protested. No company our size could absorb those development costs. Up front. Exactly. But Ascension isn't relying on this project for revenue. According to my source, they've secured venture funding, significant venture funding. They can afford to take a loss on Westbrook to establish market credibility. The strategy was as brilliant as it was ruthless. Use Westbrook as a showcase client, absorb short-term losses for long-term positioning, leverage inside knowledge of both Phoenix's approach and Westbrook's needs to craft an irresistible proposal. Frank's building Ascension to compete directly with Phoenix, I realized aloud. His visit wasn't about partnership. It was reconnaissance. He wanted to see what we've built so he could position against it more effectively. Penelope's expression confirmed my assessment. The Westbrook presentation is in 18 hours. What do we do? I stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the city skyline as I considered our options. We could try to match Ascension's guarantee, putting Phoenix at significant financial risk. We could withdraw from the pitch entirely, focusing on other opportunities. Or we could find another approach, one that leveraged Phoenix's strengths in ways Frank and his team couldn't anticipate. Get Bobby and Pippa in here, I said, turning back to Penelope. And push our morning appointments. We're going to redevelop our entire presentation. Complete overhaul in less than a day? Penelope looked skeptical. Is that even possible? It has to be, I replied, already clearing my whiteboard for the new strategy session. Frank thinks he knows what we're going to present because he believes he knows how I think. But he's still fighting the last war, still seeing the Rachel who worked at Meridian. A plan was forming, risky, unconventional, but potentially brilliant. Frank had always been focused on the grand vision, the impressive proposal, the perfect pitch. He believed business was about the big moments, the dramatic gestures. But I had learned that true success came from something else entirely, something Frank had never understood or valued. We're going to win this, I told Penelope with newfound certainty, but not by playing Frank's game. We're going to play ours. The Westbrook boardroom fell silent as I concluded our presentation, deliberately different from anything we had originally planned. Gone were the elaborate technical demonstrations and complex analytics visualizations we had spent weeks preparing. In their place was something far more powerful: evidence. What you've just seen isn't a projection of what Phoenix could do for Westbrook, I said, looking directly at each board member. It's documentation of what we've already done. 6 weeks ago, with your CIO's permission, we began implementing our approach on a limited basis within your customer service division. The results speak for themselves. On the screen behind me, the metrics told a compelling story. Response times reduced by 32%. Customer satisfaction scores improved by 24%. Operational costs decreased by 18%, all achieved without disrupting existing workflows or requiring significant retraining. We didn't come here today to sell you a vision, I continued. We came to show you proven results specific to your company, your customers, and your challenges. The strategy had been born from necessity and executed in complete secrecy. Rather than compete with Ascension's unsustainable financial guarantee, we had offered Westbrook's CIO something more valuable: a no-cost pilot implementation to demonstrate our capabilities before the formal pitch. The late nights, the all-hands effort to deliver measurable improvements in a compressed timeframe, it had all led to this moment. Phoenix doesn't need to make promises about what might happen if you choose us, I concluded. We've already shown you what will happen. The only question is whether you want to continue and expand these results across your entire organization. As we left the boardroom 2 hours later, contract in hand, I caught a glimpse of Frank entering with his team for their now futile presentation. Our eyes met briefly across the lobby. In his expression, I saw the moment he realized what had happened. The dawning comprehension that he had fundamentally misjudged not just me, but the company I had built. Phoenix had secured the largest contract in our history, not through grand promises or unsustainable guarantees, but through demonstrated value and tangible results. We had won by focusing on Westbrook's needs rather than on beating Ascension's offer. Exactly the approach Frank had always dismissed as soft and ineffective. 3 months later, Phoenix moved into new offices, a modern space in a downtown Mao building with our logo prominently displayed in the lobby. The team had grown to 32 full-time employees, with plans to add 10 more positions by year-end. The Westbrook implementation was proceeding ahead of schedule, already generating case studies and referrals that were opening doors to even larger opportunities. On the day of our official ribbon cutting, I stood before the assembled team, investors, and clients, feeling a sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. When I founded Phoenix, I told them, it was born from necessity, a way to rebuild after nearly being destroyed. But what started as survival has evolved into something far more meaningful, a company built on integrity, mutual respect, and genuine value creation. As applause filled the room, I caught Penelope's eye. She smiled and nodded slightly, acknowledging the journey that had brought us here. Later, in the quiet of my new office, I took a moment to absorb how far we had come. The painful chapter that began with Frank's betrayal had closed completely. In its place was a story of resilience, of growth, of transformation, not just for Phoenix, but for me personally. The $200,000 debt that had once seemed insurmountable was long since resolved. The company that had once represented my greatest professional humiliation was now a footnote in a much larger success story. And the woman who had once been told she didn't understand business had built something remarkable, not by emulating Frank's flashy, unsustainable approach, but by creating something authentically valuable in its place. Phoenix had risen, just as its name promised, and so had I. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.